Now, let us continue the next of our major principles. This one might be an extension of love your neighbor as yourself, but actually it is a subject all by itself, and it is from the Ten Commandments. Neither shalt thou bear false witness against thy neighbor. This is one of the most important points in our entire work, because while the others are principles, this one is a mode, you might say, of putting the principle into work in our experience. Now, in the human sense, when you are told not to bear false witness against your neighbor, it really means that you should not say anything evil about your neighbor. You should not say anything unkind or untrue. When we make use of this commandment, we go a step further than that, and we say, it is true, you shall not say anything evil about your neighbor. No gossip, no rumor, no scandal, no unkindness, no injustice, no untruth. But in the infinite way, you go a step further, and you do not say anything good about your neighbor either, because to say good about them is also to bear false witness against them. If you were to say they are kind or loving or just or sweet or merciful, you would be bearing false witness against them, because they are none of those things. Why callest thou me good? There is but one good, the Father in heaven. And so, to say that I am good is to bear false witness. God is the only good. God is the only life. God is the only Spirit. Therefore, in referring to our neighbor, we must refer to our neighbor neither as good nor as evil, but as spiritual. And that means partaking of the nature of God. When we speak of anyone in terms of good, naturally it is always a limited sense of good. Because no matter how good you declare them to be, you do not really mean that they're all good. And yet nothing less than that would be truth. And of course no one is all good in and of themselves. Everyone is all good, but by virtue of their godhood, of their spiritual nature. Now, the importance of this is this. If you were to say that your neighbor is sick, you would understand that to mean that you are malpracticing your neighbor, because you're not telling the truth about them. On the other hand, if you were to say they are well, you are also malpracticing, because you are telling an untruth about them. If they are well, tomorrow they may be sick, and that is not the truth about them. The truth about your neighbor is that your neighbor is immortal, eternal, spiritual, perfect, complete, and that not of themselves, but by virtue of the grace of God, by virtue of the fact that they have only God-bestowed qualities. Now, in our ordinary human existence, It is perfectly normal and natural that if we are talking about a candidate for office, we may speak of the good human qualities of one as against the qualities, good or bad, of another. In other words, we may review an individual's life and prefer one to another as president or governor or mayor. And the same thing if one were employing help. One would look at their qualifications and select the one best qualified for that particular position, thinking of their qualifications in terms of education, experience, and so forth. But that is quite a different thing than when we come to our contemplation of God and the realization of God as man's true being. So that when we, in our relationships with this world, are considering the fact of living, or let me illustrate it this way. Supposing we are going out to the market, we're going marketing, or we're going shopping, or we're going out in a bus, or we're coming down here to this hotel. We are faced with humanity at many levels, some good, some bad, and some intolerable. And there is no point in not recognizing that as a matter of humanity, humanity is graded. But even while noting that in the outer, can you see how wrong it would be if really and truly within you didn't have the feeling of, Father, forgive them, they know not what they do, and then realize on top of that, why? Well, you see, at the basis of their real being, God is their being. They're not good humans or bad humans. They're really spiritual beings. They're children of God. It is true, they're not awake to it. That's what makes them and us differing degrees of humanity. The degree of our not awakeness to the truth of our being. But now, just as we are assembled here, and just as we have been witnessing these goings-on the last few days, which certainly couldn't even be construed as even normal humanhood, much more good humanhood, yet you do know this, and you must know this, that they are neither good nor bad humans, that actually they are as much spiritual being as we are. There isn't one iota of difference between them and us in our true identity. Only that a few years ahead of them, we have waked up to the realization of God. In other words, you know why our conduct tonight is not like their conduct tonight? Let me tell you why. We have found a little measure of confidence in God power. And so we have nothing to run away from or hide from or escape from. We are wide awake looking forward to greater and greater realizations of God. These people do not believe there is a God. They have no reason to believe in one. They are living in a human life that's just about as hopeless as can be. Debt, high taxes, lack of savings, everything in this human world facing them, and no hope. Now, some of us may be in the same boat. We may be faced with debt and high taxes and small earnings, but the difference is that having tasted one little touch of God, we know where we're going, even though temporarily we go through high waters or through flames. We don't claim that we have yet apprehended. Oh, no, we don't claim that we have attained to the fullness of what we know, but at least everyone in this room knows there's a God. Everyone knows that God is available. Everyone in this room knows that God is our hope and our salvation, and that with continued striving we will reach the goal. So we have nothing to escape from. But you see, a very, very well-known author, internationally well-known author, recently wrote a book in which he called attention to the fact of just these things, that the people of this world today are in trouble such as they have never known, that between wars and aftermaths of wars and depressions and lack and unemployment and war service and high taxes and all the rest of these things, that humanity is in a bad plight. And inasmuch as God is not doing anything about it, if there is a God to do it, he has a perfect remedy. He would like the Ford Foundation and the Rockefeller Foundation to underwrite a big sum of money so that the government could pass out drugs to all the people, so that for 8 or 9 hours once in a while they could get away from their trouble. Now he says nobody knows what the ultimate result of taking the drugs may be. Might be insanity or death, but it doesn't make any difference because there's no hope for humanity anyhow. And so why not hide behind this new drug for 8 or 9 hours at a time? Well, you see, that's what they're really doing. They're hiding behind an alcoholic drug, and even when they're not filled with the alcoholic drug, they're filled with an exuberance of an outer joy that isn't inwardly felt. And so they're hiding from what we would call the realities of human life because they have nowhere to go, nothing to turn to for a way out or an ultimate help. And so they're perfectly willing to be drugged for this week, even though next week they're going to have more debt than ever. Because this liquor is paid for in cash, and so is the hotel bill. And you know, other people are taking advantage of another opportunity today. You can take an airplane trip today and take 2 years to pay for it. So you can have a week or a month of a wonderful time and then 2 years to think about it. Do you see what I mean? That in the human picture, we can say, Father, forgive them. They know not what they do. They don't know why they're doing it, except that it is an escape. That's all right. Now let's recognize that out here in this picture, but don't forget this, that there are many people who are not indulging that, who are finding their escape in escape literature. They may not drink a drop or smoke, or they may not indulge in any of these wilder things, but they're hiding just the same behind escape literature, and sometimes even religious literature, hiding from the fact that they have no God. They have no principle to which they can turn and on which they can found their existence. And so even though they may be termed the good people of the world, you can see that they are as far from their reality as these people, only it's the opposite end of the stick. But still it's not spiritual. But now let us come back to our work. We may be a room full of humanly healthy people, but that doesn't make us spiritual, eternal, immortal, nor save us from our accidents or sicknesses or deaths of tomorrow. And so you see, there is no use of resting satisfied in good humanhood or healthy humanhood. And that is the reason that the mission of the infinite way, and this is virtually the only teaching there is on earth today that encompasses this, the object of this work is not to turn sickness into health, or poverty into wealth, or unemployment into employment. It is true, those things naturally follow this way. The object of this way is the realization and attainment of our spiritual identity, in which there is no death, no sin, no disease, no lack, no limitation, no poverty. And so I say to you, watch. that you bear not false witness against your neighbor, in more especially in believing that the good ones or the healthy ones are really attaining something. They aren't unless they're attaining it through the Spirit. In other words, if you have your health in God, you have permanent health. If you have your supply in God, you have a permanent supply. If you merely have health because the doctor says the heart beats so much, or the pulse, or the blood pressure, you haven't health, because that is changeable. It can be altogether different tomorrow. But if you once achieve your health in God, you have your permanent health, your eternal health, and then there is no death, there is no passing on. There is a transition from one stage to another of consciousness. All right. To criticize or judge these people and by inference praise the good or the healthy would be equally bearing false witness against our neighbor, since our major function is the realization of the spiritual nature of being, the realization of God as the life and soul of individual being. And so it is that wherever we behold with our eyes these differing degrees of humanhood, and even while in our business experience we have to make use of it in employing help or being employed, and while we have to make use of it in our everyday experience and in our selection of governmental offices and so forth, nevertheless, keep your major measuring rod within yourself to realize that regardless of appearances, good or bad, the real nature of man is God. Then you are not bearing false witness, but you are so completely knowing the truth that very often you heal these people who are not yet awakened to their identity. I repeat this practically in every class because it so well illustrates this point. It began on an evening in Honolulu when I was giving the class some years ago this very point, the spiritual nature of man, not judging him humanly. When a young lady in the class had to go home by bus, and immediately in front of her was a man very much intoxicated and very obnoxious. And she, remembering this lesson of the evening, began to realize that in spite of appearances, Christ actually was his real being. Christ was actually his soul. His real relationship to God was divine sonship. And she told us later that very soon he turned around and said, "Thank you, miss, for praying for me. I'm all right now." Well, now, in Seattle, the next year, I told this same experience. And we had a young girl in our class, a very sweet young thing. And after the class, she went down to the coffee shop to have a cup of tea before retiring. And at the far end of that coffee shop was a man intoxicated and noisy, boisterous. And she began the same remembrance of his true nature, of that which in reality he is. And this man walked all the way from that end of the restaurant to where she was and said, "Please talk to me about God." And for 30 minutes he made her talk to him about God, and then he said, "I'm all right now, thanks." Now, you see the point in that, don't you? That is the point of what we call treatment. That's what we call prayer. When you ask for help, the question is here, when you consult a practitioner about a problem, why do they always say, "I will be with you"? Well, this is the answer. They mean, I will be with you in the realization of your true identity. I will not accept you as sick, sinful, poor, unemployed, but I, in my innermost being, realize that your relationship to God is divine sonship, and it is equally true of you that all that the Father hath is yours, that the place whereon thou standest is holy ground. You and the Father are one. I am with you consciously in the realization of your true identity. I am knowing that God is the only law unto your being. I am consciously knowing that God is your life. You can't be young. You can't be old. That's one of the terrible things about looking at youth and saying how wonderful that they're young, when you have to stop to think that 20 years from now they won't be so young. You see what happens to youth? It becomes age. Whereas if we look through the appearance and say, you're not young and you're not old, you're the child of God, you are the offspring, you partake of the divine qualities of spiritual sonship. Now it makes no difference whether you're 2 years old or 200 years old. You show forth the same beauties, the same form, figure, outline, grace. You show forth the same intelligence regardless of your age. We only show age because we have come under the universal belief that a calendar governs our lives. Now, when we begin to realize the divine nature of God and of God's creation, all of that disappears, because God's creation is neither young nor old. It goes on eternally the same. It never ages. It always is. And it is always at the standpoint of perfection. But you see that unless we know this truth, we are in the ignorance that the Hebrew people were before the Master came. He said, ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. What truth are you to know, except the truth of your divine sonship, that you are heirs, heirs of God, joint heirs with Christ in God, to all the heavenly riches. That is the truth that you are to know. You are not to judge by appearances, he said. You are to judge righteous judgment. You're not to look at a sick man and say you're sick. You're not supposed to look at poverty and say you're poor. You are supposed not to judge by appearances, but to judge righteous. What is righteous judgment? Spiritual judgment. And so we do not look at anyone and say you are well or you are unwell. We don't look at anyone and say you are rich or you are poor, but we perceive the spiritual nature of everyone. And that perception is what sets them free. Now you see, this question was asked the other evening, and I didn't have the passage right at the moment, so I held it until tonight. But it's apropos. And behold, a woman of Canaan came out of the same coast, and cried unto him, saying, have mercy on me, O Lord, thou son of David. My daughter is grievously vexed with a devil. But he answered her not a word. And his disciples came and besought him, saying, send her away, for she crieth after us. But he answered and said, I am not sent, but unto the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Then came she and worshipped him, saying, Lord, help me. But he answered and said, it is not meet to take the children's bread and to cast it to dogs. In the Master's day, the only people who believed, the only people in the Near East who believed in one God were the Hebrew people. All of the others were in some degree pagans. And he knew that there was no use of giving this truth to those who had gods many, They couldn't receive it, they couldn't accept it, they couldn't respond to it, and so he accepted it as his mission to give this truth only to those of his own household. And so when this woman asked for healing for her daughter, just imagine Jesus Christ refusing it. But he did. It's right here in Scripture. But he answered and said, "It is not meet to take the children's bread and to cast it to dogs." For them, these pagans were dogs. They couldn't receive it. We say the same thing when we say, "Do not give your pearls to the unprepared thought," which is also from Scripture, "Cast not your pearls before swine." Now then, if I were to go into that room and talk the way I am here, it would be thrown back into my teeth, and I would deserve it, because I would be taking pearls to the unprepared thought. The master was a little more vigorous in his language and called them swine or dogs. We, through metaphysics, have gotten to the point where we don't do that anymore, and we just call it the unprepared thought. Now then, when you ask for help, you are of my household. You are of the spiritual household and can receive this help. And therefore, when I, whether it's orally or silently, when I realize you're neither a good human nor a bad human, neither a sick one nor a well one, Christ is your true identity, you, because of your prepared consciousness, instantly respond to that truth. You shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. You respond to it. Whereas I could walk up and down the lobby of this hotel thinking it all day long, and here and there I would hit a responsive thought, and there would be a healing like these two girls experienced. They experienced meeting the same thought, but behind those individuals was something ready and receptive and responsive, and so they answered. And here too, whereas the master actually thought that he was in the presence of the swine thought or dog thought, nevertheless, here's what follows. He answered and said, "It is not meet to take the children's bread and cast it to dogs." And she said, "Truth, Lord. Yet the dogs eat of the crumbs which fall from their master's table." Then Jesus answered and said unto her, "O woman, great is thy faith. Be it unto thee even as thou wilt." And her daughter was made whole from that very hour. See, there was responsiveness within her thought. She wasn't going to let go of the Christ. And she hung on, and he finally became convinced that even though she belonged to an alien tribe, nevertheless, she was inwardly of the spiritual household. The same thing happened with the woman of Samaria at the well. "Why," she says, "I'm shocked. You Hebrews talk to me, a woman of Samaria? Why, it isn't permitted." Certainly not. The Samaritans were swine. They were dogs. They were infidels. They were atheists. They were pagans. But he detected in her a readiness for spiritual truth and saw that she was of his household and that she could respond, and so he gave her that which he had. Now then, in every case where we are called upon for help, we do not sit in judgment as to whether a person is of the dog thought or swine thought. We don't stop to consider whether they are alien or not. If we are called upon for help, we give it. We're not concerned whether they're in a hospital, an insane asylum. We're not concerned with whether they're still taking medicine or not. And the reason is that we're not trying to change them humanly. We are trying to know the truth about their true identity. And if they're at all receptive and responsive, they will come out of it and begin to lead the spiritual life. And if not, we have still cleared our own thought and known the truth about God and God's creation. Now, it is true, it is not a good thing to continue very long working with people who are trying to divide their allegiance between God and medicine. That's true. On the other hand, to love our neighbor as ourselves would surely indicate that if someone came to us fresh out of, or still fresh in materia medica, and found it necessary to take digitalis or to take a sugar remedy, insulin, or take something of that kind, and had not yet the confidence to let those things go, that we would act the same toward them as if they had a crutch for a broken bone or eyeglasses for vision, and we would stand right by with them in their problem. We can always tell as we go on if they are making progress toward the spiritual way of life, or if it's kind of hopeless for the time being, and then we can break away from them if we find that. But, and then another thing, there are times when our own friends, our Christian Scientists or Unity students or Infinite Way students, sometimes have broken away from materia medica and made wonderful demonstrations, and for some particular reason fail in a demonstration and have to resort temporarily to surgery or to some form of materia medica. It has always been my feeling that the loving thing is to stand by with them even in their failure and help them back up again, rather than to desert them at their moment of greatest need. You see, we need each other, not so much when we're on top of the heap and all is going well, as when we're in trouble. But we need each other most when we're in the most trouble. And so, if one of us should fall by the wayside and be so unfortunate as to, for some reason or other, be forced back to materia medica, or be forced back into a love affair that we didn't mean to get into, let's not be too condemnatory or too critical. Let's be a little bit loving and compassionate and see if we can't help each other up again. It's so easy to judge, so easy to criticize, so easy to condemn, but that is bearing false witness against our neighbor, and that is the point we are not allowed to do. And so it is that we should call forth every bit of love that is within us to help those on their path, but also we should encourage them as quickly as possible to lose their trust in the visible means of support or invisible means of medication, and get back again into the realization of the infinite invisible. Now, none of this changes the fact that whatever you are beholding out here represents but the finite concept of being, sometimes good and sometimes bad. Nevertheless, you, in your inner being, have to look through the appearance and behold the Christ as the real being of all mankind. Then and then only are you not bearing false witness against your neighbor. And as a matter of fact, there is no way to come to the healing consciousness except through this. The healing consciousness does not contain one iota of judgment or criticism of human beings. If you follow the Master's teaching, you will see that whether it was a woman taken in adultery, whether it was a man born of syphilitic parents, whether it was the thief hanging on the cross, at no time did he indulge in criticism, judgment, or condemnation, but rather said, "Who made me a ruler over you? Who made me a divider?" Neither do I condemn thee. He warned them, however, if my consciousness lifts you out of this trouble, don't go back to the ways that brought you into it, lest a worse thing come upon you. But at least It won't be I condemning you, even if a worse thing does come upon you. It'll be your own reaction, your own falling backward into the mire. As far as I'm concerned, if you come to me 70 times, I'll forgive you 70 times. If you come 70 times 7, I will forgive you 70 times 7. Never in heaven or on earth will I hold you in criticism, judgment, or condemnation to your humanhood. Oh, no. I can, as a teacher, point out some error to you. The Master did that too. I can, as a teacher or as a practitioner, uncover for you some trait that you yourself are not aware of that may need correction, but it will never be done in the sense of judgment or criticism or condemnation or abandoning you to your sins or to your fate. Never. Why? Because from the earliest days of my work in this field, I learned that every individual that came into my office was the Christ, regardless of what appearances would testify to. And if I ever wavered from that, I was in trouble. Now, I had a concrete experience that revealed the complete truth of this, and not only it has been the foundation of my work as a practitioner, but it has continued to be the foundation of my work in prison work and in corporation and union work. In my very first year of practice, I was appointed first reader of Christian Science Services in Riker Island Prison. And when that appointment came to me, I was told that I must protect myself from sin-filled thought. And I did very effectively every Friday night to Sunday morning. And I don't mind telling you that I paid a horrible penalty for it. Sunday mornings were torture to me, and my own teacher couldn't help me. And finally, I had to be turned back to meditation to find out what the answer was. And one night in meditation, it came like this. How can you protect yourself from sin-filled thought if God is the mind of man? How can God, the mind of man, have sin in it? Oh, I'm guilty. Why, there's a Hebrew rabbi, a Protestant minister, and a Catholic priest go onto that same platform before I do with the idea that there are sinners out there that they're going to reform. And here I am supposed to have a new modern religion, and I'm going out there still thinking they have sin-filled thought, and probably it's my duty to heal them. Well, right there and then I lost that nonsense. And I went into the desk the next Sunday morning with the realization, why, Christ is the only identity I'm faced with. The appearance of evil is what's got all these rabbis, ministers, and priests fooled. They're trying to reform something out there, and it isn't there. What they're hitting at is an illusion. What they're hitting at is a concept. Why, Christ is the mind of these men. Christ is the life of these men. Well, when I became reader there, our average attendance was 8 to 11 men. 6 weeks later, we had 77 men. And from there on, we went up until we had 200. Now, and 2 years later, we had 15 prisoners doing healing work. Yes, ma'am. We had 15 prisoners doing healing work. And right now, I'm teaching a man healing work in the prison in Hawaii by correspondence. You see, anybody can judge by appearances. Anybody can study a little psychology and say you're good and you're bad and you're honest and you're dishonest. And then what? Does that reform anybody or heal them or help them? No, it leaves them deeper in whatever it is they are. We come along and say, oh, we do not judge by appearances. I know thee who thou art, the Son of the living God. That's who thou art. the very Christ of God. You're neither good nor bad, sick nor well, employed nor unemployed. Thou art the Christ of God, joint heir with Christ to all the heavenly riches. Now, you couldn't go about doing that for a year without attaining that consciousness that no longer saw evil outside, just didn't behold it, that's all. And when it was thrust on you in a violent way like this, it would bring a smile to your lips, not condemnation because of evil, but rather, Father, forgive them, when will they awaken? That's all. No judgment, no criticism. They can't help what they're doing because they have not yet awakened to the fact that there is a God. Now, we won't awaken either, except in proportion as we realize that Christ is our true identity. God, right this minute, is the life of us, the soul of us. God is our supply. God is our high tower, and that is the truth. That, you see, takes us out of the realm of bearing false witness against our neighbor. Don't forget that. It is all right in discussing your neighbors to say they're kind or gentle or charitable, but inside deny it and say, oh no, that's only the outer seeming. Actually, Christ is their real being, and it's Christ that's good, Christ that's kind, the Son of God that liveth in them, that gives them their good qualities. And then there'll be no reason to react to those who criticize or judge you, and on the other hand, you'll never have occasion to suffer from praise or flattery. Always remember that praise and flattery can do you more harm than criticism or judgment or condemnation. And the only way to avoid both is to say, I know there's no evil in me, but I'm equally sure there's no good in me. And then you've really agreed with the Master. I can of my own self be nothing. Well, there are three questions here. In what way does the infinite way differ from Christian Science? I think I've been telling it to you ever since last Saturday. I have been telling it to you. To begin with, I couldn't tell you in one evening. There are so many differences. But one thing you must see, there is no mental cause for physical effect. Secondly, you must see that you are not a shadow. You are not an image or an idea or a reflection or an expression. You must see that you're more than that. That God itself is your very life, mind, soul, and being, and that you are all that God is. Actually, then, you are not mortal or material. You are a state of divine consciousness, of God consciousness. And you're not a little bit of God. Since God is your mind, God is all of your mind. Since God is your life, your very life itself is eternal and immortal. If you had a little piece of God, it might not be so eternal and immortal. But since when is God divisible? God is not divisible into chunks, into sparks, into bits. God is infinite and God is indivisible, and therefore God is infinite in individual expression. And so God, and the whole of God, is your mind and intelligence. The whole of God is your life. The whole of God is your soul. Is that true of everyone on earth? Of course it is. How do you prevent God then being divided up into 4 billion bits? There's only one way. You have to close your eyes and say that God is spirit. Now try to divide up spirit. God is soul. Try to divide up soul. Don't you know that every single rose bush in the garden has full life? It hasn't got a little bit of life. It's got all the life of a rose bush. And so with us. We have all the life. And that life is God. And it is not divided. And if you can't understand that with your mind, just stop for a little while, turn within, and try to realize God is spirit. Now, since you don't know what spirit is, you do not know what infinity means, and that leaves you in a beautiful, beautiful place where you can say, it is beyond my understanding. And that is the very moment in which you begin to comprehend it. But not until you come to that point. Also, I find every once in a while students will come to me and say that, every once in a while I get the feeling as if I don't know very much. And I am very happy to inform them that they're not yet very good students. They'll never be a good student until about twice a year it dawns on them that they don't know anything, and the little that they do know they'd like to forget. You can be assured of this. If you still believe what you knew last year, you're not making progress. If you spiritually really believe that what you knew last year is truth, you're not making progress. We don't live on yesterday's manna. Every day the manna falls fresh from heaven. Inspiration comes ever new. In all the years of my practice, I have never known a truth that healed a cold today to heal one tomorrow. I've never known of any truth that you could say, this heals cancers, or this heals consumption, or this heals unemployment. I've never known such a truth. Whenever a case comes to me, I have to turn within to the Father and receive fresh light on it. And I've never yet found that a truth that I knew before is any good today. It just doesn't work that way. Every single day, with every single case, I can't even use the same truth for two cases in a row. Can't do it. The only time that I had an exception to that was one time in Boston when there was a flu epidemic. And one evening, I went home and had something like 20-odd, I believe, cases of flu to take care of. And the next morning, within a few minutes in my office, some more cases come in. All of a sudden, I realized I've got 33 cases of flu. And then I got busy in the office with patients. And at 1 o'clock, when I looked at my pad to see my next appointment, I had none from 1 o'clock until 2. And at that particular period, there was no such thing in my office as an hour left blank that way. And so I knew I hadn't consciously done it. And I thought, well, that happened for a purpose. So I closed the doors and said, Father, here we are. You set this time aside. What is it I'm to know? And very quickly came the revelation, you haven't got 33 cases of flu. There's only one case, and that's a claim of an activity or selfhood or condition apart from God. It's a belief in contagion or infection. Now, if there is such a thing as contagion or infection, and God made all that was made, it must have come from God. I said, infection, contagion, come from God? Why, yes. How could there be infection or contagion that didn't come from God? Where would it come from if God is infinite and all? Well, I can't get that straightened out. Infection and contagion come from God. Then I saw, here's this great infinite God. And here are we, the children of God. Oh, sure, now I can see. Certainly we're infected. God would certainly infect us with what? His own qualities. Every one of us is infected with the qualities of God, and I guess we can be thankful that they're contagious, too. Because if we don't get our own share, we'll catch them from each other. Yes, I saw. In contagion, infection must be spiritual. That must be God infecting his own creation with his own ideas, with his own qualities of being. And let's be grateful if that is contagious. And I want you to know something, that afternoon when I went home, I did not have one single case on my tablet. Now that was one of the rare exceptions when one realization or truth wiped out an entire slate. But it is the only experience, except that one in the prison, where I saw that there is no sin-filled thought. There is only the one mind, which is God, filled with qualities of God, and that opened up all these boys and drew them into the services. Now, aside from that, though, when a case comes to me, I have to turn to the Father, and what I knew yesterday or last year about that same type of case is of no benefit to me. That is why I still suffer in these classes. You'd think after going through 7 years of classes that now I could walk on nonchalantly, and just light a cigarette. Nothing is further from the truth. Nothing's further. I'm keyed up like a tight piano string, and the reason is that I'm not interested in anything I taught yesterday or last year or in the last class. I'm waiting for new light, new freshness of spirit to come through, because I don't want these classes to become routine. I don't want them to become made-up statements in a book. I want them to be the free flow of the Spirit. And that means I've got to forget with each class everything I knew before and let this thing come. Well, of course, there are some things that are so basic as principles that they must be reviewed. And some of these examples of healing must be reviewed. But on the whole, consciousness has to be kept open so that the Spirit of God can talk. And it is because of this that every single class does bring out some new theme, some different approach to the subject of truth. And that is why healings can take place spontaneously, because we're not depending on effects. Now, a word or a thought that we had yesterday is an effect. A cause is a spontaneous truth coming through at the moment of need. If mortal mind is nothing, why do we make mistakes? For the simple reason that we have not yet consciously made our contact with the one mind. And so we are depending on memory, we're depending on reason. Now you must remember this, as long as you're reasoning anything out, you have just as much chance to reason incorrectly as correctly. So you can make mistakes. It is only when, through study, practice, meditation, that you have risen above the thinking mind, that you are then so completely subject to the infinite divine mind that there is no longer room for mistakes. And even then, I don't believe that until the ascension that we will have this 100% demonstrated. But let me say this, that in proportion as we meditate 10, 12, 20 times a day, maintaining this contact with our inner divine source, in that degree we will make fewer mistakes and ultimately none. Do we lose our individuality at death? Certainly not. God is our individuality, and you can't lose God at death. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, thou art there. I have no individuality of my own, nor have you. God is my individuality, and God is your individuality. And therefore, we are all different because God is infinite. God is infinite in expression, and therefore God has to appear infinitely. And for this reason, every snowflake is different than every other snowflake, and every finger mark is different than every other finger mark print. And every one on the face of this globe is different than every other one. Have I not said before that no one knows you? Do you not know yourself that no one knows you? Do you not know that even your own mother doesn't know you or understand you, your own husband or wife? Why? Because the you that is really you inside is known to no one but yourself. It is such a distinct individuality. It is such a distinct, almost you may say, separateness from every other individuality, that no one can fully understand another, because no one is like enough unto another to understand them. Oh no. Individuality is with us in pre-existence and in this existence and in what we call existence unto all periods of the future. I am I. That is the way you can say it to yourself. I am I. And that means I am not you. And that means you are not me. I am I. And only I am I. And I am so much I that I am different, I am distinct, I am individual. And yet, because God is my nature, I am infinite. Now, I would like to, in carrying this one step further, since now you recognize that God is your true being, I would like you to remember this. God will overcome his adversaries. I would like you to remember that you have no adversaries. Your problems are at an end right here and now. You have no adversaries. You have no problems. Scripture says God will overcome his adversaries. And you can be assured of this. You need not fight. Stand still and see the salvation of the Lord. All power is in God, not in man. And therefore it is God that does the overcoming. And it isn't God overcoming for you. It is God overcoming for itself. In actual being, it isn't an overcoming. It's a revealing, a revelation. But to our sense, it is an overcoming. But there will be no overcoming while you say, I must overcome. I have problems. It would almost be as if your practitioner were to say, oh, I just can't go to sleep. I have so many problems. Now just think what would happen to your practitioner if they had 100 patients and each patient only had 2 problems. Yeah, we have a practitioner with 200 problems. You'd never expect healing from that practitioner, would you? No, the only reason you go to one is because you believe they have no problems. They have found the realm of God. And so they're never going to let you bring your problem and make it theirs. So as far as the practitioner is concerned, it isn't the practitioner's problem. Certainly it isn't yours. It's God's problem. And so remember this. God will overcome his adversaries. And then there is another statement that goes well with this. For by strength shall no man prevail. You remember that other one? Not by might, nor by power, but by my Spirit. And so it says, for by strength shall no man prevail. That is, not by physical strength, not by mental strength, but by the spiritual strength, which is of God. And you don't use that, God does. For by strength. Just to remember that sentence very often will free you from your discords. Just to remember, for by strength shall no man prevail. Not by all the physical strength I could use, and not by all the mental labors. Now what's left? Just spirit. That's all. Just gentle, sweet spirit. And if you remember that, for by strength shall no man prevail, it gives you a chance to let down, to relax, to let go, and then the Spirit takes over. And also to remember God will overcome his, not mine. The moment I acknowledge that I have adversaries, I'm really in trouble. But as long as I can remember I have no adversaries, if there are any in this world, they must be God's business. Never forget these 2 things. For by strength shall no man prevail. Thank you.